So here we are on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, and it's an honour and a privilege to be joining in what is a very long tradition of cultural work on these lands. I think we've all been both, I'm not sure what the word is, kind of shocked but relieved to hear Kirsten's talk this morning, to actually have this conversation really loud out as the keynote of our conference about the relationship for non-Indigenous archivists in particular to the records and archives related to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in this country. So really energising for everybody. Lots to think about. I'm not sure about you, but I feel like I need to go for a big walk to digest everything I learnt and heard. So, but the nature of conferences is that the flow continues. So, as I said, our session is focused around access. So the bit of work that the programming committee did was to try to shape these sessions into thematic strands that would help you kind of digest what the community has to offer in these beautiful talks that people have put forward. So today's one is shaped around the premise of access, different ways of addressing access. So we're going to start with Angela from the Lutheran Archives, and we're going to move on to Daniel. Daniel Casey, please make Daniel super welcome. He's not joined the archivists community before. He's a PhD candidate at the ANU. He presented at a history conference recently. Our colleague Kirsten Wright spotted Daniel and said, hey, put in a paper. We'd love to hear from you. So please give Daniel a hearty welcome. Take the time to have a short chat with him in the break. He's only here for this session, so make the most of his presence. Up in Queensland, joining us is Julie Shanks. Julie's from the Queensland State Archives, and she will introduce herself we'll introduce her in more detail when we get to her talk. So the order of our talks is we will start with Angela, and then we'll move on to Daniel, and then we'll hear from Julie. We're going to save up your questions for the end. So I've given you one piece of homework, which is to ask for a tech per room. My other piece of homework is I want you all to think of a question. Okay, so there's lots of people here, so someone else will probably ask your question before you do, but I really want you to all actually think about a question, because the beauty of conferences is engagement. If we all just sit there and do what we do at home with the tally, we're not going to change archival practice. If we actually engage in discussion, we can change archival practice one conference at a time. Okay, so I think you've heard ample from me. So our speakers are now going to take the floor, starting with Angela. So I'll just put this on the proper view. Angela, the one thing for you to note is that you do need to speak into the microphone so so everyone at home can hear you. So bearing in mind that we've got roughly 50% of our audience is online. So we've got a big online audience. So hi, everyone. Hi. Okay, and folks, the other thing I want to say is it's totally fine if you want to move between sessions. Nobody will be offended. So don't feel like you have to, just politely walk out quietly. But you're very welcome to do that.
Okay. Hi, everyone, and in person and online. And thank you to Louise for the introduction. My name's Angela Schilling, and I'm currently working as a practicing collection archivist on Kaurna country, which is Adelaide. Before I begin my talk today, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on today, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, as well as the traditional owners of the land that I live and work on, the Kaurna people. I want to acknowledge the ongoing care and connection of the traditional owners of these lands, and that this care and connection is what allows us to live and work where we do, to enjoy the landscapes, to work in the archives, and to connect with each other like we are this week. So I've got a lot to get through, so I'm just going to try and smash through it. I really apologise if it feels quick. It felt quick to me when I was practicing it, so. But questions at the end. So we all know the archivist's motto, that the archives hold stories and these stories are alive. However, we also know that these stories are not always easy. Accessing them can bring about a swathe of emotions and reactions, and our understanding of trauma in and around the archives is thankfully growing. There are plenty of things we can do as archivists and archival institutions to make this process easier, more accessible, and safer for those who experience direct and intergenerational trauma. Our profession has access to a growing selection of tools and protocols and practices. We're slowly implementing the Tandanya Declaration. The ATSILIRN protocols have been around for a long time now, and the United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People continues to be a great tool for archivists. However, there are often immediate and practical ways in which we can implement anti-racist archival practice, including the way we describe archival materials. I want this paper to be a really practical, or I guess low-level guide to ways in which archivists on the ground can undertake actively anti-racist description work. Work that can be done immediately, but still with power, and why it is imperative that this becomes a priority in our collection management. It will draw on the comprehensive document Anti-Racist Description Resources, authored by the Archives for Black Lives in Philadelphia's Anti-Racist Description Working Group. It's a mouthful, but as well as other sources. Although this resource was written in the US, it is easily adaptable to our work in Australia. And I say this to all non-Indigenous white settlers who work in the archives: this is our responsibility. Okay, so, yep, all right. I would firstly like to introduce you to this resource, which has been instrumental in my thinking about this topic and has also informed the bones of this talk. This document is titled Anti-Racist Description Resources and was first put together in 2019 by Archives for Black Lives in Philadelphia's Anti-Racist Description Working Group. The front cover looks like this, with a yellow swirl, and it can be found quite easily with a Google search. The document was put together over the span of about 2 years, with an update a year after its initial publication. Its recommendations are intended to combat the racist structures inherent in predominantly white institutions and in archival description of underrepresented and marginalised groups, in particular those in the Black community. I highly recommend finding a copy of this document and keeping it next to your desk if you are actively doing description work or you write policy about description work. It's easy to read and is a great entry point into this work. Okay. The first thing I'd like to talk about is autoethnography. Adams, Ellis and Jones in 2017 stated that autoethnography is a research method that uses personal experience to describe and interpret cultural texts, experiences, beliefs and practices. Autoethnographers believe that personal experience is infused with political, cultural norms and expectations, and they engage in rigorous self-reflection, typically referred to as reflexivity, in order to identify and interrogate the intersections between the self and social life. The way that this intersects with our work as archivists is by analysing our own personal and cultural experiences and using this as an active backdrop to our work. Basically, this is an active step we can take from the important mantra that archives are not neutral. I really feel strongly that we can't do the decolonising and anti-racism work we need to do as archivists unless we have done this personal work and really understand how it fits into theoretical and practical archival frameworks. Questions we could ask to help us understand how our world influences our work as archivists could be: what is my cultural background and how do I identify? For instance, I'm the daughter of both European settlers and an Asian migrant. I was raised in a middle-class, very Christian, culturally Eurocentric and mostly English-speaking environment. I identify as Thai Australian, a member of the queer community, as relatively progressive politically, but still lots to learn. I feel aware of my biases, but I know that my upbringing underwrites my behaviour and thinking without my consent a lot, and I need to be aware of this when I'm working. What values were instilled onto us? Have we undertaken any unlearning? By unlearning, I don't mean taking mandatory cultural competency courses through HR, but true unlearning. This takes time and persistence and is often quite uncomfortable. It could mean unlearning our internalised racism, our privilege, our classism, and many other things. And then what are our social and professional environments at work or outside of work, and how have our experiences shaped us? All of this sounds personal to be relevant at work, but I would argue that for most of us here, if not all of us here, our personal values do underpin our work. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here listening to this talk. Decolonisation work in the archives is personal, and we need to do the work so that others, those who are affected by trauma, don't have to do the work when they access the archives. I've just got a quote here that I really like. From Jessica Tai in 2017, a liberatory descriptive standard mirrors the central concepts of cultural humility in that there must be an emphasis on self-reflection and in surfacing the power dynamics that archivists hold over record subjects when composing description. Jessica Tai does amazing work if you want to look her up. When we do this work, we can come to acknowledging the real visceral trauma that viewing records can hold. Description is not just about actual description. It's about making an emotionally safe space on top of a physical space. For someone who walks into an environment which they know can hold trauma, for that person just to know that you, the archivist, the librarian, the access worker, whoever is behind the desk, for them to know that you acknowledge the trauma and see them goes towards making that space safer. I won't go on too much about trauma because there's some great work being done by the ICA and the ASA on this. The workshop next door, which you're all not at, but that's okay. I just wanted to acknowledge that before we start any description that addresses anti-racism, we must fully acknowledge the trauma that can be inflicted by racist description and that we can work to reduce the harm. So, to get into some more practical things we can do when we describe material in the archives. And when I say describing material, I'm talking about all metadata, catalogue records, finding aids, indexes, photo captioning, blogs we might write, social media, anything that we do to talk about collection material. A few years ago, I came across this document called the Progressive Style Guide, created by Some of Us, which is a global anti-capitalism grassroots movement of thinkers and activists. It's a wonderful guide to inclusive language, and while we should all remember that language is always evolving and shifting to encompass new spaces and communities, it's a great diving board to jump off from and to start thinking about how the language we use in archives really matters. I'll put the reference up at the end. This is just a little screenshot of that Progressive Style Guide by Some of Us. It's a collection of, I guess, very practical guides to terms used in all different, this one's about disability, and on the left you can see there's some, I won't say good terms, but some more used terms by disability rights activists, and then some terms on the right that are outdated and not to be used. We don't use those words anymore, they're harmful. So that's just what that style guide looks like, and it's very helpful. Where am I up to? Oh, sorry, just trying to find my place. Oh yeah, is that right? Okay, so this guide is built upon 4 central principles, and they are people first language, active voice, self-identification, and proper nouns. I won't go into these details too much because of time, but I urge you to have a look at the document. So what does this mean for us archivists, thinking about the power of the language we use? A few things. There really is no need to use the language that is used in the content if it is racist or problematic. We can decide on the safety or harmfulness of the language we use. We can always allude to harmful language, give warnings, or use safer language for titling. When we describe people, we can think about the humanity of a person before their circumstances. Things happen to people, and these events are not the crux of people's identities, nor should we assume or exploit that. Things like disability, homelessness, drug addiction, it's humanising to talk about people before the things that have happened to them in their life. Another thing we can do is to be aware of emotional stereotypes. This might be obvious to some of us, but it's very, very surprising how often they appear. For example, describing someone as angry or emotional or a shy Asian person, these things are harmful and they don't exist. Next, we move on to voice, style and tone when describing archival content. Similar to language, the voice, style and tones that we use will affect how people either see themselves in the records or how they might come to understand the context of those records. To do this well, we need to unlearn the neutral voice of traditional archival description. We can use an active voice when describing oppressive relationships. So there's just an example here of two sentences that say the exact same thing in content, but the way we talk about them is very important. So you can just see that the second one gives agency to the High National Guard and tells what actually happened. And the language is just much more straightforward. We can also focus on the humanity of an individual before their identity. So another example down here where we've got two sentences that say the same thing in content, but the way that we say it is very different. Giving Sally her name before her identity, before any other type of identity, gives Sally agency. We can refrain from using flowery, valorising biographical notes for colonial collection creators. And we see this all the time. Describe the subjects of documents about oppressed or marginalised people, at least to the extent that you describe the creators. Describe relationships of power when they are important, for understanding context of the records. Lastly, I would really love to see some more archivists use accurate and strong language, such as lynching, murder, genocide, massacre, hate mail, and so on. We can't let our own discomfort censor the material. It is okay to be uncomfortable with racist material, but not okay to privilege your discomfort above accurate description. Ideally, we establish and maintain relationships with community to talk about description. However, this can take time. Consider the needs, In the meantime, we can also take cues from those with working relationships. Current historians, writers, linguists, community members that are working with us. There are people that we can talk to that already have these relationships that it's okay to work with. Think about the plurality of audiences when writing descriptions. Is there heaps of archival jargon? Is the wording accessible? Is there lots of academic language? And if you think something is only accessed by academics, maybe there's a reason for that. It's not accessible to others. And also, who has connections to this material? Are they being centred or even considered? Consider the needs of those who want to know a bigger picture, for instance, to rediscover their identity, understand historical trauma, or find coherence in one's life. It's important for us to think about older racist descriptions. We know that, just like material that was created in the past, older descriptions can also be harmful and racist. However, racist descriptions in older finding aids or catalogue records are just as harmful as if we were to create new racist descriptions, and they need to be amended. Consider the user of the records. What harm could be caused by reading them? What would trigger certain traumas? What are their connections to the record? How easy is it to search? We don't want people to have to use harmful search terms when looking for something. What sensitivities are there? For instance, privacy or the current political climate, which didn't exist when these records were made. So we come to descriptive standards and classification, which could be a whole talk in its own right, but I'll just breeze through it. Marissa Duarte and Miranda Billard-Lewis in 2015 described descriptive standardisation as a violent process that inherently valorises some perspectives while simultaneously silencing others. While this might seem a strong statement, I'd like us to also think about the way we use what we are comfortable with and how this affects our willingness to change and find alternatives for others' safety. DACS, or Describing Archives, the content standard, Library of Congress subject headings, Dewey, name authorities, MARC, and others are all used to classify information in libraries and archives. This means that it's assumed there are rights and wrongs, or binary ideas such as the other, or universalities. Things that we can do to combat the extremism of standards in archival description are use free text as much as possible. Don't rely on the Library of Congress subject headings. ATSIS has come up with a really great thesaurus called Pathways. That's a really great alternative. If you need to use a harmful subject heading, explain why you're doing that. And being mindful of how individuals are described in authority records. Think about gaps. Lastly, I will just talk about archival transparency. So think about gaps in the collection and whose voices might be missing. These can be outlined in any description you make. You can choose to do that. If the institution is responsible for collecting, be more aware of the gaps and attitudes towards legacy collections. You can still address these. Make current collection development policies easily accessible to the public and to communities. Always include processing notes with names, updates, issues, any changes you make, any gaps. And consider sharing online statements, goals or policy about language with the public. A really great one to look at is the Find and Connect language policy. They have a really great policy up online about the words that they choose to use on their website and in their descriptions and finding aids. And these are my references and what I've been alluding to throughout the talk. So in conclusion, I hope this helps to think about the power we have when we describe archival materials and where to start in thinking about how we can make our descriptions safer. I believe that power cannot be wielded for good unless we understand our own positions. And while this takes a bit of effort, it is the first jump off the jetty into all decolonisation work, not just archival description. When you get into the flow of it, when you know that that's the work you want to do, you know you can take these small but powerful steps to start the process of this ongoing work. So back yourself when you know it's hard to do when there are systems in place, and we all work in generally white institutions. Be open, be reflective, be aware, and try to refrain from being defensive. Most importantly, be caring and know that someone will feel it when they access the records you more safely described. That's it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Angela. I've been twittering away there trying to share this with various students around the country. So I've certainly made some notes of some resources that I wasn't aware of, and I'm sure a lot of you are nodding your heads and thinking we've got some homework to do to go and check out some of those things. So thank you so much, Angela, for sharing your synthesis of quite a few years of deep thinking about this. So it shows the power of practitioner knowledge because you really engage with why this is important. So thank you for generously sharing that with us all. Questions? So I don't think you'll have trouble recapping on what we've heard. We heard from Angela about our anti-racist archival description options, and we've heard from Daniel about these issues around this official personal records space. So questions from the floor. Anyone got a burning question they've been sitting on for the whole time? Yes, fantastic. So we will then take a question from someone in virtual land. If you'd just like to say your name, that's really helpful, because some of us will know you, but some of us won't. Hi.
Hi, my name's Kate. I work at Public Record Office Victoria. I have a question about the challenge for professional archivists around the idea of changing titles, because my understanding of the importance of transcription was to transcribe records as they were created, regardless of the current use of language or how offensive the language was. One to create metadata for discovery online, which is how search works now, and because historians may associate certain words with certain periods of time. And then your suggestion of changing the title, and whether there's a conflict or how you can get around that challenge.
Yeah, there's definitely a conflict because we do want, the original context of the record to still be there. I guess I would probably say there's room for changing the title on a front interface and having the original titling or the original description maybe just a bit further below, where it's doesn't pop up when people search necessarily, but it's still searchable. So maybe, that's obviously not all systems are going to allow for that kind of search, but maybe thinking about ways that we can use, like what traditionally, square brackets or things like that to make it a bit safer for people to search, and just trying to think about getting around those things in those ways. So looking for just like multiple plural kind of descriptions and titling that we can do. Yeah.
Thank you. No, as you wish. So do we have a question from the digital? We do.
On? Yep. So we've just got one from David H. He's asked, by moderating the archival description language to make accessibility more safe and respectful, how is the viewer prepared to view the archival material when they see it?
Can you say? I don't really understand the question. Can you say it again?
Yeah. Okay. By moderating the archival descriptive language to make accessibility more safe and respectful, how is the viewer prepared to view the archival material when they see it?
Okay, so do they get any prep? Do they get to know your process?
The viewer, sure, yeah.
I think we're interpreting that to mean you're asking about the process, David.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll just answer it like that anyway. But, I guess that's exactly where that accountability and transparency in description comes in. So, talking about who does a description is really important. I guess in terms of if there's any preparation for the viewer, I guess that just comes back to accountability for the archivist. I hope that answers the question. Sorry, it's probably,
Yeah, I think it does. I think that's, someone else from the floor might want to chime in to clarify that question. Does anyone else on the floor have another question? Yeah, fantastic. Here comes Althea.
Hi, Tim Roberts from the Australian War. A question for Daniel about access restrictions to the PM papers. I just wondering, along as well as all the kinds of restrictions you sort of mentioned in your talk, did you come across any examples of how they may have changed their decision making for personal papers that included that during a time when they were PM when Australia was at war, like international military operations? John Howard was in a few when he was in PM. I was wondering if that had become a new kind of restriction that came up in your research.
In my research, no, because of the type of material that I'm after, which is letters from members of the public to Howard and briefs about the contents of the letters. But as I request access, there are a lot of the times that individual documents are withheld for national security reasons, and based on the title or the time, you can sometimes guess that they are to do with Afghanistan, 9/11, East Timor, but I couldn't comment on that.
And have we got another one from the virtual realm? No. Okay. So, folks, it's quite good that we've stunned you with our brilliance, because it's actually afternoon tea. So just checking that no one else is sitting on a burning question, because sometimes it takes a while for these to percolate. Yes, there is. I knew there would be. That's great.
G'day, I'm Lewis Hinch from the National Film and Sound Archive. I've got a question for Daniel. Hey.
It's great. We're moving
In terms of, I guess I'm just trying to figure out where Australia sort of sits as whether or not we are more open or more enclosed in terms of transparency. Like, how would we compare? Like, I know in some countries you can telepathically make some of these documents secure. I don't think we're that advanced yet, but are there examples in other countries you think we should follow or ones we should avoid?
Broadly, and we're doing some work on this with a colleague in the history department, the US up until the 1960s regarded all presidential records as the personal property of the president, which meant the president could take them with him and do with as he saw fit. The passing of the Presidential Records Act, I can't think of the year, changed that to say that all presidential records belongs to the people. And I think one of the benefits of the extended transition time in America is that you do have the space, the NARA, National Archives and Records Administration, to go into the White House and secure documents before they're shredded and put down the toilet, hypothetically speaking. And I think the very quick transition time in Australia, which has benefits, does mean that you have to pack up quickly, as you saw that photo in boxes, and deal with things after the fact. And the archives often get the material from the former PMs many, many years afterwards. So we don't know what happens in that time. On the other hand, in the UK, there is a lot more of a process. And I think that is in part because there are more public servants in number 10 to enable a smoother record-keeping process. So I think there's some work that could go into looking at the way the UK runs their processes.
Thank you.
So I just want to conclude by giving our speakers a really hearty thank you. And Julie, thank you very much. Okay, so afternoon tea awaits. So I'm really sorry. It's always a